Hello and welcome to the first of 4 lessons on quadratic equations. In this lesson, I will introduce you to quadratic equations. We will see how they are linked to the quadratic function and also find out how they help us to solve for the x-intercepts of a quadratic function. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to see that if a multiplied by b equals 0, then a is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0. Explain why a quadratic equation can have 1, 2, or no roots. Solve a simple quadratic equation. I'm going to start off with an investigation of this interesting number called 0. Interesting? You must be kidding. Well, I'm not. Have a look at this. 1 multiplied by 10 is equal to 10. 1 multiplied by 100 is equal to 100. 1 multiplied by 1000 is equal to 1000. 1 multiplied by 10,000 is equal to 10,000. We know that 1 doesn't change the number you multiply by, so there's no surprises. And what also makes sense is that the bigger the number you multiply by, the bigger your answer. Let's look at another easy number. 2 multiplied by 10 is equal to 20. 2 multiplied by 100 is equal to 200. 2 multiplied by 1000 is equal to 2000. 2 multiplied by 10,000 is equal to 20,000. Now, pretty obvious too. The bigger the numbers you're multiplying, the bigger the answer. What do you predict will happen when we multiply by 0? Well, by the logic in our other calculations, our answer should be getting bigger as we increase the numbers we're multiplying. Let's have a look. 0 multiplied by 10 is equal to 0. 0 multiplied by 100 is equal to 0. 0 multiplied by 1000 is still equal to 0. And 0 multiplied by 10,000 is still 0. Now, you knew this since primary school. Any number multiplied by 0 gives you an answer of 0. Well, when you think about it, any amount of nothing is still going to be nothing. Way too easy? Well, then my next question to you will be simple. If 3,142 multiplied by b is equal to 0, can we find b? Well, we know that any number multiplied by 0 is equal to 0. So, b must be equal to 0. Now, if a multiplied by b is equal to 0, what can we say about a and b? Well, at least one of them has to be equal to 0, right? That's right, but not necessarily both of them. So, if two numbers are multiplied together to get 0, then at least one of them has to be 0. Now, if you found that easy, well, that is the most important thing for you to understand about solving quadratic equations. Now use the same logic to help solve this equation. X multiplied by x minus 1 is equal to 0. Now we have two numbers here, x and x minus 1, that when multiplied gives us 0. This means that at least the x or the x minus 1 must equal to 0. We can have that either the x is equal to 0 or x minus 1 is equal to 0. We get that x is equal to 0 or x is equal to 1. So, this means that we have two answers to this equation. Two answers for the same equation? Does that make sense? Yes, it does. There is nothing wrong with having two answers. Equations do not always have to have one answer. You may think you need to find just one value for x, but that's not necessarily true. And here is how. Let's take a look at the same equation on a graph. When we multiply out the x into this bracket, we get x squared minus x. So if we use this equation as a graph, we would get y is equal to x squared minus x. We will use this graph to show that there are indeed two answers to this equation. Now, I won't waste time showing you how to draw this graph. I'm sure you remember how. I've used math software to plot the graph for us to look at. Graphs are so cool as they can help you to see what's going on. Look at this. If you look carefully at the graph, we see that it cuts the x-axis at the coordinate 1, 0 and at this coordinate 0, 0. Y is equal to 0 for both these points. The equation for this graph is y is equal to x squared minus x. Now, if you look at the graph where it cuts the x-axis, we know that it cuts at 0 and 1. The y value here is 0, so we can write that the y value is 0. And if we substitute that 0 here, we can write that 0 is equal to x squared minus x. Now, if we go back to our calculation, we see that x squared minus x is equal to x multiplied by x minus 1. And we can now write x multiplied by x minus 1 equals 0, which is our original quadratic equation that we started off with. And these 2 points have the x values that we found for the quadratic equation, 1 and 0. So the graph shows us in picture form that the quadratic equation has 2 x values when y equals to 0. Cool, hey? We sometimes call these x values the roots of the equation. Now, this is a term worth remembering. Now, will quadratic equations always have 2 roots or x values when y is equal to 0? Well, to answer this, we'll need to take a look at some of the possible parabolas we can have on our graph. The roots of any quadratic equation are the x values when y is equal to 0. This means that the roots are the x values at the x-intercepts when y is equal to 0. Now, we have used some math software again to help us plot rough sketches of some parabolas that don't have 2 roots. Can you see that in this graph, the x value is equal to minus 2 and the y value is equal to 0? And this is the only point where the parabola cuts the x-axis. Now, how many roots or x values are there when y is equal to 0 on this graph? Do you see that this graph does not touch the x-axis? This means that there are no x values when y is equal to 0. In fact, y is not equal to 0 on this parabola at all. So, we have found that quadratic equations can have no roots, 1 root, or 2 roots. Okay, think you're ready to give it a try with an example? Use what we have seen so far to solve this equation. Now, we know there are 2 brackets here, and both of them multiplied gives us 0. This means that either x plus 5 must equal to 0, or x minus 1 must equal to 0. Now, these are both easy sums to simplify, and we get here that x is equal to negative 5, or here x is equal to 1. Do you see that for this equation, we also have 2 roots? In this lesson, we have seen how to solve a quadratic equation which is equal to 0. We factorized the equation and saw that at least one of the factors would be equal to 0. We also discovered that a quadratic equation could have 1 or 2 solutions or even no solutions. Solve for x. Number 1. X multiplied by x minus 2 is equal to 0. Number 2. 2x squared minus 4x is equal to 0. In the next lesson, we will solve some more quadratic equations algebraically, and we'll see if we can find equations that have 1 solution or no solutions.